seen the worst, and there is nothing left for me to hate, so I can lay me down, my brothers, on the ground. I bled today until Coyote comes to raise me up and carries me
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Scottish Rugby podcast, brought to you by the Scottish Rugby blog. I am Cammy Black. Joining me this evening, we've got Iain here. Hello, Iain.
Hello, Cammy, and everyone else.
Yes, we're live as we always are at the minute. That's our plan going forward. We're live now on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. So if you are watching this live, then feel free to get in touch on the comments, and we'll answer any questions or comments as we go. You can also find us at scottishrugbyblog.co.uk, where you'll find the latest news, views, and other bits and pieces on there, and you can get involved in the comments. We're closing comments down for the podcast page purely because we've had some comments recently, and it kind of with it being an audio thing, I think it's hard for people to understand the context in which things were discussed. So you can comment on most other articles, but if you want to get involved in commenting on the podcast, best thing to do is to jump on the night and get involved live. You can find us as well on Twitter at Scott Rugby Blog. I'm at Cammy Black, and we also have our Patreon page where you can subscribe to the podcast, and in return, for the price of £3 a month, you get in the Richie Vernon Thunderdome. So that gets you ad-free copies of the podcast. You also got exclusive monthly content. We're going to be doing a podcast tonight for Patreons only, where Iain and I are going to have a wee chat about eligibility rules. So if people want to be outraged about eligibility, they're going to have to pay to be outraged about that.
It has reared its ugly head again.
It has, yes, but we're not going to discuss it in the main podcast.
No.
We're just Patreons. I love you Patreons get to hear that. You can upgrade, though, if you want to, for £5 a month. Just because you like us, mainly, we will give you a shout out on the pod, and that gets you in the Dougie Donnelly's members lounge. So taking a seat in the members lounge tonight, putting their feet up with a glass of their choosing, we have Jamie Settle, the Gavner, and Brian Dunn. So welcome to all three. Thank you very much for your support. The other thing we're going to do from this week, we've had some requests from people for shorter podcasts. Now, I think opinion on that is divided. Some people like the long rambling podcasts that we do.
Absolute nonsense that comes out of our mouths.
Exactly. It's a good old chat. That's what we like to do. So we don't, we're not planning on changing that anytime soon. We like our long rambles. However, if people are pushed for time and they just want to kind of get to the main meat of the discussion and the issues of the day, then we're going to put out a shorter podcast. So you won't get Hands in the Ruck. You won't get Where's Dougie Donnelly. You won't get me rambling at the beginning telling you about all the different ways you can contact us. We'll just focus on the news and any games we've got to review, things like that. So it'll be about 30 minutes. So that's also going to be available for Patreons. So if you want a shorter podcast, you are going to have to subscribe. But you get all the other benefits as well, like ad-free podcasts and the exclusive monthly ones as well. So that's not bad for £3 a month or £5 a month if you want a shout out, is it, Iain?
I'd say not, and even the £5 one, we are considering chucking in a couple of nudes if that so tickles you.
That's Iain. I should stress.
photoshopping will be required. I think just me on my face on Ryan Gosling's body in what's it called, Crazy Stupid Love?
I don't know.
Have you not seen it? It's quite good actually. Emma Stone
Oh.
says you look like you've been photoshopped.
Okay. Is that the one with
Steve
Carell?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll look at that.
As far as rom-coms go, it's pretty good.
Yeah. Martin Bell says he'd prefer more jingles. Well, Martin, we're working on something. We had a comment on the Patreon page last week saying we don't play our theme tune for our Patreon episodes. But we're gonna change all that. We've got a plan for having a Patreon only jingle. So that's hopefully going to be available in the next month or so. So watch this space. The main thing we're going to talk about tonight is the Scotland squad announcement. One thing that we're going to get to first, which we didn't touch on last week, which we probably should have done, was the fact that the pools for the 2023 World Cup were announced a couple of weeks ago. And because of coronavirus, which we have to, I don't know, just everything's because of coronavirus at the minute. But because
of the offer of nudes.
Yeah, that's also because of coronavirus. I don't know if it's I don't know how coronavirus might affect how the nude would appear. If it's Photoshop, presumably not.
Well, if it's an X-ray of someone with coronavirus, but could be interesting.
Yeah,
I've seen an X-ray of.
Yeah. So as of what World Rugby have decided to do is they've done the rankings from the 1st of January 2020 because there are some nations, I think Japan is one of them, who have not played any rugby at all since the World Cup. So they decided that was the fairest thing to do. So Scotland are going to be in the third tier, the third pool of being drawn out. So the first pool is South Africa, New Zealand, England, Wales. Second pool, Ireland, Australia, France and Japan. And then the last pool is Scotland, Argentina, Fiji, and Italy. So it's potentially, Ian, we could end up in a group of death.
You broke up a bit there, but did you allude to, along the old cliche line, the group of death?
I did allude to the group of death, yes.
Yeah, very much so. Although second tier, second seeds, Australia, we've had the better of them the last couple of times.
Yeah.
And Japan, I think probably about 8 times out of 10 you would expect to beat Japan. It was just when we lost in Japan, it was it was a remarkable performance by them, as we've discussed at length in a podcast back at that time. That tragic 12-step process of grieving or whatever it was. So yeah, but as dropping down into the third pot, you never want to do that because you can draw 2 very, very good teams.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems a bit unfair because we've beat France, who are ahead of us. So you think they could maybe have worked out some kind of Duckworth-Lewis method, maybe?
You would have thought so, maybe kept. You would have thought they would at least could have kept people who haven't played in the same position. Fixed their positions. So you could have fixed for Japan in 8th. But I think even then we were 8th and they were 9th. So I don't think it would have caused too much of an issue. I mean, I suppose 3 out of 4 isn't bad in Pool 2 because really Australia, France and Japan on our day. Yeah. Ireland, I think, is a trickier proposition, although Ireland tend to go to pieces during World Cups.
Well, unfortunately, not the last one. We were the ones that crumbled into pieces.
As long as they don't meet them in the first. As long as they don't meet them in the first game, we're fine.
Poor Hamish Watson's knee crumbled that time.
Yeah,
but it's a different proposition now. We showed in the Aviva that we can tangle with them.
Yeah, I mean potentially you could. I mean, if we're lucky, we end up in a pool with Wales, Japan, and us.
Yeah, I mean Wales are still that work in progress. With Wayne Pivac taking over, it's not the Gatland Wales we're used to. And also, by then, the likes of the legendary AWG, well, you would think he would have retired because he'll be.
I don't think he'll ever retire. It's like a Robocop.
Well, that's because he only plays like once a season for Ospreys.
Well, that's true. What is that? Was it like he'd only? I think there was Josh on Blood and Mud the other week was pointing out that Alan Wynne-Jones had never ever played away at Murrayfield for Ospreys. He's not. I don't think he'd played either of the Scottish teams away. The only Scottish team he'd played away from home was the Border Reivers.
Christ, that's going back a while, isn't it?
I know. That's a hell of a stat, isn't it? Which just goes to show the problem with the Pro 14, I think.
Or the Pro.
The Pro, however many it is this week. So that's going to be tricky, potentially. So that's at the end of December that gets drawn. I suggested by house party at that point because it's getting drawn in France. So who knows? By some sort of a team's meeting, and everyone will have to stick their hands up.
Hosted by Pichot, or has he completely stepped down?
He's completely stepped down and kind of stepped away for rugby. It'll just be a lot of Bernard Laporte shouting at Bill Bowman, telling him his microphone's on mute. You're on mute, Bill. Bill, you're on mute.
As if Bernard Laporte's not in jail.
That's very true. The situation is Bill Beaumont doing the draw himself from his conservatory.
Bill's house party with Mr. Blobby. For anyone who's under the age of 30, that will make no sense.
No. I think I don't know what our listenership. I did get a brief kind of look at our listenership, and I think it's men 25 to 40.
It's basically us. It's basically us and our mates that watch it.
So that's how that is panning out at the moment. The big news this week. We're not going to touch too much on the Pro whatever it is games this week. Although Glasgow did win, Iain, and we should point that out. And Edinburgh didn't do too badly against Munster.
Yeah, I would just like to apologise to anyone who's looking for a match report. I missed the start because I was making dinner, but I thought, you know what, I'll catch up on it later, and I'll rattle out a report. It's not on Setanta's playback. I've even looked today, and it's still not there. I was trying to watch it today. Doesn't exist. I can watch the Barcelona Getafe game from last night. I can watch stuff that they showed 2 hours ago, but I can't watch the Glasgow game. So I
like the fact you call it Setanta.
So
given it is right. I mean, that's its level.
Yes. Well, they are just. I mean, I think a lot of them just sort of two-paid over. Because it's still crap.
It is. Well, I think the fact they've lost all the production, they've lost their production partner in Sunset and Vine. So, like we said in the other podcast, it's pretty much just Dave from HR running the cameras, and so yes.
Yeah, one thing that really bugs me about it is that there is no. You can't rewind to the start of the program or anything. That's why because I only missed maybe the first 10 minutes, but I thought, you know what, I wanted to see the whole thing, so I couldn't start it and rewind. And a lot of times, if you even try, I've only got it on the player. I don't have it on my TV subscriber, and there's no function for that. And there's no, if you pause it, every time you pause it, if you want to go grab a beer or go if nature's calling, you come back, you play, and then 20 seconds later it broke. So the video stops. You need to restart the whole thing again. All right, fantastic. I've missed a try.
Yeah, I've not signed up yet.
Bother. They took even though I could get like an 80 quid a year subscription through the Warriors thing, even though it said it was for new customers only. I think if you phone them and give them a bit of grief, but they'd already taken 100 quid out of my account. They don't send you an email to say, by the way, this is your subscription is about to renew. The player itself, the app player, doesn't give you your membership status. You have to log in through the website and then check it all. It's not the most user friendly of setups.
No, it's not. It's difficult. I think the reason. I mean, I'm kind of waiting for them to get desperate. I reckon they'll get desperate in a couple of games, and they'll discount it heavily. In terms of the main news, like we said, though, is the Scotland squad announcement, and I think as we go through that, we might touch upon some of the kind of stuff that happened in the games as we go. So, in terms of the announcement, in the forwards, we've got Simon Bergen, Jamie Batty, Fraser Brown, Blair Cowan. We'll come back to that. Scott Cummings, Cornell Dupree, Matt Ferguson, Xander Ferguson, Grant Gilchrist, Johnny Gray, Richie Gray, Rob Harley, Nick Haining, Ollie Kebble, Stuart McInally, Willem Nell, Jamie Ritchie, Sam Skinner, Rory Sutherland, Blade Thompson, Ben Toulis, George Turner, and Hamish Watson. And then the backs, Darcy Graham, Nick Grigg, Chris Harris, Adam Hastings, Stuart Hogg, who's named as captain, George Horn, Damien Hoyland, Sam Johnson, Hugh Jones, Blair Kinghorn, James Lang, Sean Maitland, Ali Price, Finn Russell, Scott Steele, Duhan van der Merwe, Duncan Weir. Now, I reckon the only reason Blair Kinghorn is in there is to distract from the fact that he recalled Finn Russell. Because I didn't even check. That was going to be in my thoughts all day. Is I'll check to see if he's recalled Finn Russell. But the first name that grabbed my attention was Blair Cowan.
Yeah, I know. Good sleight of hand from Tooney. A bit of an odd one, given that Cowan, the Townsend's never picked him before.
No.
The last one I think was he played against England when Van Cotter was in charge. So it's 4.5 years ago since his last cap. And he's obviously
34.
He spent a little bit of time in the second tier. London Irish was second tier last year, weren't they?
Yeah.
The year before. I think when I got my BT Sports, I saw him play a couple of times, and he was looking good. He's still a bit of a penalty giving away machine, but he was getting a bit of the park, winning a few turnovers. But when you've got the likes of, I thought Tom Gordon, who'd been involved with the squads previously and is obviously a bit younger, and you'd be looking to maybe introduce him to the squad, and with the World Cup, a couple of years away. But yeah, an interesting choice. Maybe it's just to do the haircuts.
Yeah, because he is. I thought he'd retired to become a hairdresser, which is why it surprised me. Because I think I'd read an interview last year saying that's what he was going to do. He was going to go in and train it. Well, yeah, I think he has trained as a hairdresser, but I thought he'd retired to go and do that. But he is still in the reckoning. Now, I think my genuine thought on this was that there is an element to the way that the squad's been chosen that suggests that there is an effort to protect both pro sides here, because previously, Scotland would have had the luxury of calling up a big squad, including players that were even on the fringes of Glasgow and Edinburgh week in, week out, like your Tom Gordons, to come and join the squad. But that means that they then miss out on time training with Glasgow and Edinburgh. And given that both squads are fairly thin on the ground because of coronavirus, because of the financial pressures, that you don't have the luxury of getting to someone like Tom Gordon into camp for a couple of weeks because he's needed at Glasgow.
Yeah, obviously, Cully. Cully's still in Glasgow, seemingly. One of my friends sees
I know.
him in the gym quite a lot. So
he hasn't.
Why he could just be on a pay-per-play kind of deal or something. But obviously, there's only like Fuzzy and Tom Gordon that are open sides. So I suppose that comes out in reckon. Wilson's played 7 before, but we've looked at squad depth, and obviously there's a few guys away. Well, I mean, also, given the number of players that have left Glasgow, the likes of what's his name again, Valacoloma. Sorry if that was pronounced wrong. The Matt Smith situation with Frocklar, Adam Ash, thin on the ground. So maybe that could be the case. But yeah, it gives a chance for these younger lads to maybe step up and experience pro rugby for the first time.
Yeah, because I suppose he's 34, so he's not exactly a prospect for 2023 World Cup. So it's more of a stopgap, and that can be the only explanation as to why you would, at this stage, be looking to plug a hole rather than give someone exposure.
Yeah, and I think as well, like I was saying, there's in terms of natural open sides, I think it's Hamish Watson, the only other one that's in the squad. Richie's a kind of 6.5 kind of thing. He's played 7 before, but Jacqueline isn't a major thing. He hits a lot of rucks, but he doesn't get a lot of turnover penalties, that kind of thing. And obviously, if one of Richie or Watson goes down, then you're in deep trouble. Quite a lot of number 8s in there, which is we've been missing them before. But like Haining, Cornell Dupree being back, which I was a bit surprised by because he's never set the heather afire.
He's been good for. I think he's been good for Worcester, though. I think that's why he's in there. The reports from down south is that he has. He has played very well down at Worcester, and I think that's the reason that Townsend's given for Blair Cowan being called up. I mean, Andy Loans there saying Blair Cowan, at the moment he's been good in the Jackal role for London Irish in the last few games, and I think Gregor Townsend talked in the press conferences this week about the fact that he has added things to his game since he's played for Scotland. So I mean, maybe it's a change of tack from Gregor Townsend. That you can't constantly be building that within. I suppose within international rugby, yeah, it's great to get players in to get exposure, but you also need to win games. And to win games, you need to pick players that are playing well rather than worrying about getting people ready for the World Cup.
Yeah, and the national team should be about selecting the people who are playing well. There's been cries of favouritism before, so this clearly kind of blows that out of the water. And we'll see what he does. Maybe he's in there to pass on some of that crafty 34-year-oldness to some of the other guys like Matt Fagerson, who got chucked in at 7 against Edinburgh, the first sort of comeback game. And Fagerson's not really a 7, is he? But maybe he's in there to give him a couple of tips on the dark arts and what have you.
There's an interesting comment here from Martin Bell, who says, is Cowan in because Tooney wants to repeat Rob Moffat's legendary experiment with Embra of playing a back five made up exclusively of open sides?
Well, I suppose with the breakdown laws, and there's we're seeing a lot more penalties given to the attacking side, or the side who are attacking the ball at the breakdown. Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe
I'm not sure you could. I don't think you can do it of open sides. You can definitely do a back five, a full kind of second row and back three of back rotors. So you have Rob Harley and Sam Skinner at lock, and then Richie, Richie Watson and Thompson, Fagerson, whoever you want. So you could select a back. Your back five of back rotors.
How are we for hookers? Because of course Fraser Brown can famously go back there, can't he?
Well, that's it. So I mean, you could even do. I think potentially aside from prop, you could have Fraser Brown and Stuart McInally both converted back rows. As I think George Turner
as well. Yeah,
Turner as well. So essentially, you could have pretty much your entire scrum pack, your entire pack could be made apart from your props.
Yeah. We'll need to get them learned. Were you disappointed that of the London Irish players called up? Were you disappointed not to see Alan Dell and his handsome face making an appearance?
Just beautiful Alan Dell. I mean, I'm always disappointed not to see Alan Dell.
I don't.
That's just. That's just. Do you not? How can you not see it? He's the most beautiful man in rugby. I say that as a I say that as
John Barclay's retired, maybe.
I didn't see the John Barclay thing. I never saw it. No, I didn't see the John Barclay thing. Alan Dell.
You've got a different type, clearly.
Well, that's it. I'm comfortable enough in my heterosexuality to discuss that.
Same here, clearly.
Get in touch in the comments. Who do you think is the handsomest man in Scottish rugby? For my money, it's Alan Dell. Ian says John Barclay, although I know he's currently playing, but still looking for a job.
Obviously,
I
think. Alex Dunbar and Tommy Seymour. We've discussed this before. They're in the running, but Dunbar. Does Alex Dunbar even got a club at the moment?
No, he doesn't. I think he's looking for a club. I think he's been training, though. I think he's been in in training in Scotland. I think John Anderson is suggesting Ian Hay.
Thanks, John.
Bless him.
Isn't he kind? I haven't been able to say that.
No.
Just PayPal him the net.
In terms of the rest of the forwards, then I suppose that there wasn't really many other surprises. I mean, Rob Harley was maybe a bit of a surprise, but I mean, Rob Harley's only 30. I was surprised. I thought that Rob Harley was kind of edging towards 32, 34, but only 30.
The man's just an absolute machine. But I was surprised to see him. But he has, over the last 2 years, he's more primarily been used as a lock. One of the things that sort of people would criticise him for, and I tend to agree, he's not much of his actual sort of carrying skills and handling skills aren't great. He's just an absolute nuisance. So he hits plenty of rocks. He gets in people's way. He's good in the line out. And we've seen the likes of the sort of the new sort of dual open sides thing seems to be having locks that can also play flankers, because you've got the likes of Tag Byrne, Maro Itoje. Obviously Harley's not quite as good as those two, but I mean the guy, like you said again, it's Townsend's picking on form. He has been one of Glasgow's top performers, and he won man of the match on Sunday. I don't know if that's fair obviously, because I've not seen it. But no, he's been playing a lot more the last two seasons than he did maybe the year or two before that. Possibly Glasgow.
He looks bigger as well this season. And I know there was a photo of him in the new Glasgow shirt, and it looked like he developed a dad bod over lockdown. But clearly that's not affecting his athletic prowess, because he's getting man of the match and lasting the 80 minutes. But I don't know if that's a deliberate thing or an age thing. He's just coming to the age where he's kind of filling out naturally. But he looks much bigger than I've ever seen him in the past.
Yeah, I suppose if he's going to be used as a jumper, if he's leaning back in, you want that extra bit of weight. So maybe that's part of the thinking. But no, it's interesting to see him back, and of course Richie Gray is back in the
yes. Which
we could see the Gray boys.
We could see the two Greys at lock. I mean, that's an interesting one. I mean, I think he's come back, and I think he's been steady away. But I mean, there's nothing.
He's been behind Harley in the pecking order the last 2 games. Maybe it's a fitness thing, as is always the case with Richie Gray. But no, he seemed to, once he'd knocked back the World Cup call, you thought maybe that was the end of it. But no, there he is back again. But obviously he's going to have to earn his place. One slightly concerning thing from the Edinburgh game, Grant Gilchrist went off injured about half an hour in. With looked like some kind of arm injury. We've not heard anything about that. Have you heard anything about that?
No, the only thing I would say is that the fact he's named in the squad would indicate that it's not that much of an issue, because otherwise he wouldn't be in the squad, because there's a number of players who are listed as unavailable. So we've got, I think you've got Duncan Taylor, Rory Hutchison, Kyle Steyn, Byron McGuigan, Alex Craig and Luke Crosby, all unavailable due to injury. And the fact Alex Craig down at Gloucester has been kind of specifically named as unavailable, you would have thought if Grant Gilchrist had done himself something that's going to keep him out of the squad, that he wouldn't have been named or would have been on the injured list. So I assume he's...
So is this squad just for the first 2 games?
This squad's for the whole tournament, because it must be. I mean, I'm assuming the players are going to come in and out. Now the word is that Jaco van der Walt is going to be training with the squad, because he doesn't become eligible until November. So I think potentially Jamie Lyle on Twitter was this week suggesting, I think it's the last game. It might be the last 2 games that he's eligible for. And I think they'd be keen to capture him and get him a game. So he's going to be training with a squad, I think, in the same way that I think Tim, when Tim Visser first qualified, he went on tour with the team, because he qualified. Was that the year they did the tour of Australia and then Fiji? And
it was 2012. 2012, because I was still in New Zealand at that point, and he played against Fiji, and he's debuted and scored twice, I believe.
That's it. But he was on the tour. He travelled with the team. He couldn't play the first game in Australia. So I think it's a similar situation, but domestic.
The famous 9-6 game, which had its anniversary just recently.
With, of course, Johannesburg butting heads with Al Strokosh, which we'll come to later on. I don't think there's any other kind of surprises in the. It's not. I mean, the front row maybe is something that's going to be interesting with Ollie Kebble coming in. He's behind Xander Ferguson at Glasgow, and
usually for Glasgow he plays loose head, and Xander's on the tight head side. But when Xander was away in Scotland duty and Glasgow had a few tight head injury issues. I think the Nook was injured and Adam Nicol. They ended up putting Ollie Kebble in ahead of Darcy Ray. Like Ollie Kebble would start at tight head, and I think one game he even played a full 80. He's played twice, I think, at tight head for Glasgow. But I suppose that's an option that he can fill both sides of the scrum if required, like Simon Bergen can. Can Rory Sutherland do both sides, or is that Murray McCallum I'm thinking of?
I think it's Murray McCallum you're thinking of. Yeah.
Maybe,
it's handy to have him in there. I mean, he's got a try at the weekend as well, so it'd be interesting to see if he makes a step up. That's going to be the big question.
Maybe a bit of a surprise.
Yeah.
He's not getting much, if any, game time. But we are thin on the ground in terms of props, and obviously, what with only having the 2 pro teams.
You have to take what you're given, I suppose.
Yeah. And there's none sort of... Not even Alan Dell is good enough. There's no one in England, I don't think, playing at high enough standards. So
no, Ian Mackay just makes that point. Says no Alan Dell, no Alan Dell. Sadly, absolutely devastated I was. The reason why we think it's the kind of full squad. I mean, he's kind of said as much. I think players will obviously come in and out of it as we go, and obviously we haven't even got to the someone's going to get coronavirus at some point.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, are they going to be happy sending people to and from places? Because does that raise transmission risk, even if it's only slightly? You know, because did you see the thing about the Scotland football players the other week? Where is it Ryan Christie and Stuart Armstrong? No, Ryan Christie and Kieran Tierney. I think they got sent away because Stuart Armstrong had tested positive, even though I don't even think they were in the same room, just because they were playing the PlayStation together.
Yeah,
like, I don't think that whoever it was that was sort of overseeing it, or giving the guidance, understands that you can play LAN network games. Oh no, they're passing the joystick about together. Oh no.
I think that's the main. I suppose that's probably the other reason that we've got someone like Blair Cowan coming in, that is to kind of protect the integrity of the Edinburgh and Glasgow bubbles. The less players you have to move from the pro teams into the national setup, because presumably throughout the entire of this, all these players are committed to being away. It's almost going to be like a touring squad that you're not going to be allowed home, I wouldn't have thought, or to go and drop down to trade. They're not going to be released back to Glasgow and Edinburgh for the games either. You would have thought, again, to protect the integrity of the bubble. The less mixing they do, then the better.
Yeah, especially with the case numbers on the rise. It would make sense to keep them in these bubbles.
The one thing that's interesting, I think, is the Finn Russell, I think, is going to get there in time. And the Townsend was saying that they're going to be he's obviously not going to be released in time for the start of the training camp. So I think they're talking about sending Zoom training videos and joining in by virtual meetings with the rest of the squad in the meantime. So that'll be Finn Russell and then the players that have been selected from Exeter. I think Finn Russell can arrive on the Monday before the Georgia game, but the Exeter players, so that's Stuart Hogg, Johnny Gray and Sam Skinner, are playing in the Premiership final the day after Georgia. So we're not good. They're not going to be. You're not going to have Stuart Hogg for that first game. You're not going to have Johnny Gray. Sam Skinner, I think. I mean, he's going to be close to starting kind of bench player, but he's, there's plenty of players that can fill in that role. But you're going to be, for the Georgia game, we're going to be short of Hogg and Gray. Not that it matters because it's Georgia, but it's not the best to prep.
God help any of them if they think they can have 3 pints. Yeah, I mean, that's, I suppose, Harley is that kind of Sam Skinner, like we were saying. Yeah, there's enough strength and depth there to deal with Georgia, no problem. Gilchrist and Tullis are probably going to be the first choice lock option you'd think there. And there's cover in those positions where those guys are. We might even see Hugh Jones at fullback. Who knows?
Oof, possibly. That's very true. It's I mean, in terms of the backs, obviously Duhan van der Merwe was the big kind of, not a surprise as such, but that's the one we've all been waiting for. We'll touch on the rights and wrongs of that when we discuss that on our Patreon only episode later on. Scott Steele was a bit of a bolt from the blue, though. Where that came from.
Yeah.
Former Scotland under 20s, 27, playing for Harlequins at scrum half.
Yeah, because he'd, I think his contract at London Irish had run out. But I've only caught a little bit of Harlequins. But, Townsend said he'd been playing very well. So, and it's interesting to note that Pyrgos isn't on the injured list. And he's been omitted. I mean, Nick Groom is back fit. He played against Munster. Charlie Shield didn't play. I don't know if he's injured. So Dan Nutton was on the bench. But yeah, Scott Steele just seems to have come from out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Obviously, there were some people going, what about Finlay Christie?
What about Finlay Christie, Ian?
He's in New Zealand. he's probably, I'm not going over there. I'll get coronavirus. I'm safe here.
Alan McDonald, who's not with us tonight,
Sam
but
Hidalgo Klein. That's who.
There we go. This was Alan's comment at the start of the night before he disappeared. He's got to catch up with us later. He says, Donkey Weir's call-up means Sam Hidalgo Klein is the new Donkey Weir. Discussed. Now, I think what he means by that is the fact that everyone's been calling for Sam Hidalgo Klein to be called up. Because he's been playing very well for Exeter. Obviously, he's been starting for them. They're in a European and Premiership finals. I think Gregor Townsend's explicitly said that it's the fact that he hasn't spent much time with the squad, so he can't get in and learn the systems that quickly. But then Scott Steele...
Yeah.
But then I think it's that Scott Steele can come in now and do that.
Fresh palate.
And he's got enough time between now and the first game to pick up all the systems, whereas Sam Hidalgo Klein wouldn't be released by Exeter until after the Premiership final, which is after the first game. So him coming in and you'd be mid-tournament for him to come in and have to kind of get to grips with everything and meet everybody and get familiar with the setup again. So he was mentioned by Gregor Townsend, but I think I can understand why, if he's not available to kind of train in the run-up to the first game, then you can understand why he wouldn't be selected.
Yeah, I was going to accuse Townsend of some Gatland logic, but he's explained himself well there. But no, the thing is, like, Hidalgo Klein will have played with the majority. You know, he's played with Finn Russell before, directly outside him. You know, you'll know a lot of the Edinburgh boys.
I suppose it's knowing the calls, though, isn't it? It's knowing the calls, knowing the setup, knowing the, you know, haven't been familiar with the Gregor Townsend, you know, heavily indexed Bible of plays. And
but if they're going to zoom them to Finn, could they not zoom them to Sam Hidalgo Klein as well?
Very true. You're unraveling Tooney's logic there.
Because Finn's not been in the squad for a while either, has he?
No, he's not been. The other name that was in there, James Lang, was, I think a lot of people have said he's been playing very well for Harlequins, and he's got that versatility that he can play at centre or 10, so there's a bit more cover there. So that, not so much of a surprise, I guess, more just that it's interesting that he's back.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it might be to protect Glasgow because Pete Horn can stay there and cover 10-12. Yeah, I mean, Lang, I think he looked, the two caps he's had, he was, I mean, one game was against USA and he looked quite good against them, but yeah, he's one of these guys who's just been on the periphery and you're sort of like, is he good enough to get in? But I mean, looking at the squad, due to the injuries to like Hutchison, Taylor, there aren't a lot of inside centres. I think like Sam Johnson is the only name that really jumps out at me. Yeah, Sam Johnson seems to be the only one because we've seen, you know, what happens if you try Hugh Jones at 12 with Chris Harris outside him. Yeah, there's a lot of outside centres actually.
You know who can play 12 though, don't you?
Adam Hastings.
Finn Russell.
Finn Russell, yes.
Finn Russell can go to 12.
Finn Russell can play anywhere. Finn Russell's going to go in the back row. That's why he's been chunking up, so he's stronger over the ball.
Very true. It's going to be interesting to see what selection. I think it's definitely a squad influence. I think the more we think about it, it's definitely a squad influenced by the need to protect the Glasgow and Edinburgh bubbles as much as it is selecting Scotland's best available players. How that kind of pans out will be interesting. I think, you know, Gregor Townsend said he's reflected on how he dealt with the Finn Russell situation, reflected on how he was as a coach, in the same way that I think everyone's reflected on life over lockdown. So I suppose the proof will be in the pudding come the first game.
I'd say the second game is the bigger one, isn't it?
Yeah, the Wales game's the big one. The Georgia game's a warm up, and I think there's so, and I think the fact that you're missing Hogg and Gray in particular is you're not going to. It's going to be interesting who plays that game and how much of a warm up it is. There's going to be a lot of players that will need the game time, but also you're not going to get a full strength team out.
Yeah, I would think Kinghorn. I don't think Kinghorn's played yet this season, has he? Has he been nursing an injury? Sean Maitland, there's a fullback option as well.
Adam Hastings.
Yes.
Duncan Weir on the bench. Adam Hastings at fullback.
Or Duncan Weir at standoff.
Oof.
Duncan Weir's going to be our starting standoff. That afro was giving him power. And so we're going to have Hastings at fullback with Finn Russell at 10 when everyone's fit.
Yeah.
Hogs on the bench. No, it'll be. I mean, this is the thing. We're looking at the strength and depth now. It's actually it's hard to pick a sort of 15. Darcy Graham would be first choice winger for me on the right anyway. Although, did you see the Edinburgh game at all?
Bits of it. I've seen bits. I've been on my own. I've had my own little mini lockdown here, so I've not had that much of a chance to catch up on the weekend's games. But I saw that the clip of him doing the clear out on Jack O'Donoghue was unbelievable.
And then I swear to God, he didn't touch the ball for an hour. I completely forgot he was on, and then the 65th minute, he pops up. He's always taking a couple of players on. I completely forgot he was on the pitch. But yeah, he's such a dangerous player.
I think when he does get on the ball, I think it's that thing of that Jack O'Donoghue clear up was just how unexpectedly good his defensive game is as well. He'll put in some very smart hits, and he's really quick to the breakdown, and he's really strong. He's surprisingly strong over the ball
because he gets right underneath their legs and just tips them up. That's what he did to O'Donoghue. Yeah, no, he's a cracking wee player.
It's who I guess. Yeah, who goes on the other wing? It's whether or not you have a Darcy Doohan thing. I think that's what we'll see against Georgia. It's just going to be a case of
Doohan qualified.
Yes, I believe he's qualified for that first game.
Right, cool. Either him or Maitland, then I would think.
Yeah.
But I mean, this what I don't want to see is, just fitting players in unnatural positions. Just see, we'll see how that goes. I don't really think you can. Although it is just a warm-up game, if you are looking at it with an eye towards the week after against Wales, you might want to keep some combinations going, especially Sam Johnson's not played this season. Unless he played Sunday, of course, I don't know. So, we'll need to wait and see.
Yes. So that's the squad. That's our squad chat for the moment. We'll come back. Obviously, we'll keep up to date with the comings and goings. Earlier this week, though, or was it last week? It was actually last week. There was people. We caught a wee tweet from an account some of you may follow called Rugby Vacancies, and they were looking for current or former professional players to go and start in the WWE wrestling. So, Ian, you caught up with it's Andy Lockwood, didn't you?
I did.
Andy Lockwood from Rugby Vacancies to interview him, just find out a bit about what Rugby Vacancies is, and also kind of what the attraction is of getting rugby players into the WWE. So if this works, hopefully this works. I've tried it already. So this is Ian's interview with Andy from last week.
Okay, folks, for the next segment of the podcast, it's a no-holds-barred interview with Andy Lockwood. Andy is the director of Rugby Vacancies, a global sort of network for any kind of aspect of the game, people who are even graphic designers, I think you've advertised for, up to players themselves. And he's also the head of the Rugby Outreach Project. Can you just quickly tell us, Andy, what the Rugby Outreach Project is all about?
Thanks, mate. Yeah, so I've started a new charity, which might seem a bit of an odd time to start a new charity during a global pandemic, but I've been doing it for a couple of years as a project and then transitioned it into a charity. And basically, I provide free rugby fitness and strength conditioning advice to teams anywhere around the world. So that could be anything from national unions all the way down to local community teams.
Okay, and so you said that's a global thing. Is it all done online, or have you actually been out to visit any countries?
So at the moment, it's all done remotely. It's all done online. But the next stage will be the development in countries. So that'll be delivery of workshops, either to players and coaches, probably starting somewhere in the South Pacific, maybe the US as well, and then branching out into Africa and the rest of the world.
Nice one. Okay, and so we'll also get on now to your sort of day job. You're the director of Rugby Vacancies. Could you just, I've given a brief intro there, but could you maybe tell our listeners and viewers exactly what Rugby Vacancies is all about and your role in that, how you came up with the idea?
Sure, mate. So about 3 years ago, so March 2017, I stopped doing an internship at Bath Rugby. I was working in the academy. It was only 2 evenings a week, just a part-time internship, doing some S&C with the academy guys down there. Well, that all sort of finished, and I found myself with no involvement in rugby for the first time in 30 years. Felt very strange. So I started looking around for a couple of jobs, and I found some that weren't suitable because I was in the wrong place or just weren't suitable. But I knew a couple of guys who they might suit. So I'd message them saying, hey, mate, I've seen this. Well, after doing sort of 5 emails or messages to various friends saying, hey, mate, I've seen this, it's near you, that might suit you. I thought, well, why don't I put it all into one place and then people come see it? And that's essentially what happened when Vacancies was born. A very simple idea. It's gone from there. And since 2017, it's grown really well. We've had some really good growth. And I have assisted teams from your local grassroots teams all over the place up to sort of the Crusaders and Fiji, looking for their coaches and coaching staff.
So do the clubs, do they contact you, or do you canvass? Do you have to go and canvass them, or how does it? How do you come up with?
We do 2 things really. So I will either find vacancies online just through various sources, or clubs will get in touch with me. Either way works. And actually, I had a club get in touch, quite recently, a German club looking for players. So the COVID response in Germany has meant that they're back playing again, so they're actually looking players for this season and next season.
Okay, and so the main reason we've got you on, it's actually one of our regular listeners tagged me on the tweet. Me and the match announcer at Edinburgh, Single H, Bruce Aitchison.
Bruce, yeah.
So the current drive with regards to that is you're looking for former pro rugby players to join the WWE.
That's right, mate. Yeah.
How did that come about exactly?
So that was an unusual set of circumstances, and I was connected to the guy who used to be the head of athlete development for WWE. So he was responsible for bringing in new people to the WWE to be trained to be wrestlers. He subsequently moved on, but about 2 years ago, I was connected to him, and he saw what I was doing through rugby vacancies, and we had a brief chat. And he said, "Well, look, if you know, or you come into contact, or you're in touch with any current pro or recently retired pro rugby players who were looking for a bit of a second career," he said, "Would they consider the WWE?" And I said, "I don't know. Can ask. It's not something that's been done before. Although there are a lot of crossover wrestlers and WWE athletes, and The Rock is probably the best example. But most of the current crop of WWE wrestlers came from some kind of sporting background. It's quite easy in the US to sort of pick these guys up when they finish college, because if they don't go on to the NFL or NBA or wherever they're going, actually for some of them, sport just stops. So they want that interaction. They still want to be involved. So in the US, it's quite easy, but no one had done it before for rugby. And in the last 2 years, I've put 5 guys forward, 2 Aussies and 3 Brits. None of them have made it to the kind of, none of them have been signed on a contract. They've all gone forward for auditions. I think 1 or 2 have gone on for a second audition, but none of them have quite made it all the way yet. That doesn't mean that people can't. And rugby's on the face of it, people would be a bit surprised as to why rugby players might want to go and be in the WWE. But actually, the crossover is huge.
Yeah, well, you mentioned The Rock. I'm actually wearing a The Rock t-shirt at the moment, and guys like Stone Cold Steve Austin. So obviously, physique's a big thing, and rugby players are kind of pre-built for that. Now, a lot of folk, if whatever forum you're on, as soon as somebody mentions wrestling, people start going on about how fake it is. It's all scripted. But these guys take a serious amount of bumps and what have you. So, I mean, is that something that maybe came into mind when you were asked to go look for rugby players? Because rugby players are always, they're never 100% fit, they'll tell you. And it's probably the same with wrestlers. So did that come into consideration?
Absolutely, man. That's one of the sort of crossover elements, is that a rugby player is used to getting hitting someone. They're used to that physical contact, whether that's being tackled or tackling someone. So that absolutely, that crossover is huge. The other aspect professional rugby players is that, as you say, physique-wise, a pro rugby player is often tall, fairly athletic, fairly well built. They're also probably quite trainable and can pick up new skills quite easily. Hence why people who've had an exposure to professional sport previously can often make a good crossover and a transition into the WWE because they are trainable, coachable. They're used to that sort of intense training environment. They're used to training every day, and they're used to that physicality. So rugby players or ex-rugby players absolutely fit the mold of people who are suitable to transition over.
Yeah. One thing we'll quickly discuss here. I don't know if you've seen, obviously with the current lockdown, mental health issues are top of the talking order list. And there has been a number of players recently who have come out. Some even Glasgow Warriors had a 23-year-old boy called Matt Smith decide he wanted to walk away from the game now. And also there had been some issues. If anyone's seen the documentary Under the Mat, they'll know that substance abuse problems were pretty rife in WWE and other promotions. So do you know anything about how WWE look to keep their athletes and performers mentally and physically fit?
So it's a really interesting aspect, and one of the things that actually joining the WWE from a different sport will help is that transition from professional sportsmen into something else. So you'll find quite a lot of rugby players have mental health issues over injury or anxiety over finishing a career. What are they going to do? They don't know. All they've done is play rugby since they were 5 or 7 years old, and suddenly 30 years later, or maybe even less, they don't know what to do. Well, actually, this looking at a second career in something else helps that transition out of one sport to another. My sort of background is military, so I found sending some messages to an old colleague today who said he'd had PTSD and was dealing with depression and anxiety. So I think it is a big issue in certain communities. I know that people like the Rugby Players Association are doing big things. They've got some big programs they've set up to help rugby players with that. And the WWE are the same. They want to look after the guys. The amount of resources that goes into a wrestler getting in that ring, there's years and years of training and investment and resources put into that guy or that girl. And so for them, they want to look after them. But it's interesting that how that has come on in probably, I'd even say even in only the last 5 years, about people being able to express themselves and say, hey, putting their hand up and saying, I've got a problem, and I want some help, and then being able to reach out and get that help. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that rugby players definitely wouldn't have done it. But it's good to see that change has happened.
Yeah, I mean, even like the pro players in Scotland didn't even have an association or a union until just a couple of years ago. As guys like Tim Swinson started that up. One thing you said there, actually, and it was something, the next point I was going to raise, so it was a nice segue. You said about the amount of time that WWE would invest in guys or girls. And obviously, women's rugby is, I believe it's the fastest growing participation sport for women globally. So I take it this recruitment drive is open to both male and female? Absolutely,
mate. Although interestingly, I've only had one woman come forward and say, "Could I be suitable?" But yeah, absolutely. And so if you look at the events that WWE runs, there are male matches and there are female matches and events, and absolutely, I suspect that there would be an eyebrow raised if a female rugby player said, I'm going to join the WWE, but that's no different to any of her male colleagues going across and doing the same thing.
Yeah, I think as well, and what I've noticed in WWE recently is, when I was at sort of my peak fandom in my late teens, quite a while ago now, it was the Attitude Era. So, the women were basically treated as sex objects, but it's definitely changed now. So would you look to encourage more women players to respond to you?
Absolutely. If they're interested, then yeah, absolutely reach out. There's no reason why anyone actually can't join the WWE. The only reason I've sort of been look at the rugby aspect is just because of my background and what I currently do. So if you are any male or female rugby player who thinks actually I quite like a shot at that, yeah, absolutely, reach out and we'll go from there. Especially if they've sort of touched on that elite environment, or if they have exposure to elite environments from other sports and have subsequently crossed over to rugby and then looking at going onwards.
And I suppose just finally then, what's your big sort of promotion push? How would you've already said stuff about physical fitness, but how would you really try and sell it to somebody who's considering making the move? How would you try and encourage that?
So I think there's a couple of aspects you could say to sell it to someone. Firstly, it's a great transition from professional sport over to another career, but that other career isn't completely different. It's actually quite similar. You'll be training every day, physically training every day. You'll be learning new skills. You'll also be doing your job in front of crowds, nightly, daily, weekly, whatever the sort of schedule looks like.
Anyway.
Yeah, so for that alone, it's actually really similar to rugby, albeit in a slightly different environment. But the basic concepts are really similar. And if someone is thinking coming towards the end of their career or coming back from injury, it doesn't matter how old they are. They could be in their early 20s, could be in their sort of mid-late 20s. Actually, they should consider it as early as possible, because the other aspect is actually if you get so initially you start on a sort of a training contract, and then you graduate on, and then you're actually you're competing in the events, and then it gets bigger and bigger, and your storylines become more, and so on and so on. Well, actually, if you do make it, the money can be incredible. I think I'm not quite sure how much The Rock earned, or Stone Cold Steve Austin, or John Cena, but just those three guys alone have probably earned millions from being wrestlers. So if someone is interested in it and they think that they might want to have a go, I would absolutely encourage them, even just to explore the option as something that's going to be a career post rugby.
Okay, well, Andy, thank you very much for your time. We'll be posting a link to your Twitter page and what have you on the page once we put the podcast up. So yeah, if any rugby players are interested in moving over to WWE, it's an entertaining thing. You might enjoy it. Certainly give Andy a shout. So yes, thank you very much, Andy. You enjoy the rest of your day.
My pleasure.
Yeah, a couple
There we
of
go
points
then.
of order. It was Stu Hurst that tagged me, and I forgot to mention him. And the documentary's actually called Beyond the Mat, Not Under the Mat. But there we go.
Well, there we go. And it was a really interesting chat there about the crossover and the idea of this, how easy you can transition between elite environments. That wasn't really something that when I saw it, I kind of thought that's kind of interesting, but I hadn't really considered that if you're trainable, then that's just a big thing they're looking for.
Absolutely. And also, I forgot to mention, we were already kind of pushed for time. That might rabble on too long, as I tend to do. But there's a guy, Bradshaw, John Leighton Bradshaw, who used to be a WWE champion. He actually has a rugby charity program as well. So there is he was an American footballer, but he loves the game of rugby. He was actually at Scotstoun Stadium a couple of years ago. And there's, obviously, like you said, there's the physicality element of it, and they're disciplined athletes have been in trainable environments. So yeah, it's a very, I think it would be a fascinating idea if anyone wants to take it up. I actually tagged Matt Smith in a tweet into it, and he liked it. So maybe we'll see Matt Smith flying off the top rope.
Matt Smith, second, that'd be awesome. We asked when this first came out. We said, we did put a tweet out, kind of saying, can people make some suggestions? Alan Donald got in touch. He said Stern Vern is a grizzled submission specialist.
Yes, it's like a Stu Hart, the Hart Dungeon.
That's it. I should imagine them. Vern Cotter kind of coming in. He kind of strikes me more of a kind of Vince McMahon kind of coming into the ring mid fight, maybe with some roadkill or some rabbits he's just slung over his shoulder.
What would his wrestler name be? Just Stern Vern? Or?
Stern Vern. I think it's nice and simple to the point.
was thinking Alex Dunbar, given he did a textbook belly to back suplex on Jonathan Sexton a couple of years ago.
That's very
If
true. Aye,
Dunbar kind of get a club, he can move over.
we Ek. How do you call him? The Ek.
The X Factor.
Ali Baxter had he said Ross Ford coming into the ring in a Ford pickup truck. I like that. I can see that.
Like
Full
Stone Cold
kind
Jet.
of in full borders farmer gear. Like not like, obviously because American they'd want him in the kind of dungarees and I'm thinking like tweed, the kind of like really rough tweed jacket, kind of plaid shirt, wellies, pair of baggy brown cords.
That worked perfectly. Simone Favaro, I reckon he'd be good. He'd have a hell of a spear finisher.
Hacksaw Jim Hamilton, that was Bruce Wayne. Not the Bruce Wayne. Stone Cold Strokosh. Hal Strokosh.
Yes, Hal Strokosh is a pretty terrifying looking guy. I saw him in a bar years ago in Glasgow and I was just like, monster of a human.
Yeah. Go on.
What? No, sorry, I think my mic went off there. No, he looks like a big scary man, but apparently he's very nice. So
yeah,
looks can be deceptive.
Yeah. We had some. JP suggested Rory Hughes. Now that'd be
terrifying.
That'd be terrifying. David Eagleton suggested my brother. He said he showed some skills on my stag. Now I think my brother watches this sometimes with his wife, so probably best less said about that the better.
What happens on the stag stays on the stag.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, his stag do was night out in Wakefield with my dad in a nightclub at 2 a.m. throwing shapes. There we go.
Nice.
Night I'll never forget. We'll move on though. Here's us. This is why we're doing the 30-minute flash pod for people that don't want to hear us rambling on about nights out in Wakefield. We're going to move on. We're nearly there. Don't worry. We're nearly at the end. It's time for this now. Yes, it's time for Hands in the Ruck. We've got a late entry though for a wrestler name for you, Ian. Hay Fever or the Bearded Haystacks. From Liam Bird. Thank you, Liam, for that.
I'll take that. Yeah, I've got more things in my time.
This is Hands in the Ruck, though. This is our Any Other Business section of the podcast where we sometimes talk about things outside of Scottish rugby. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're things that have annoyed us and wound us up. If you've got Hands in the Ruck, you've got a late entry, then get in touch in the comments live now. We'll pull it up and we chat about it. Like I said, for our patrons, we are going to talk about eligibility rules because they come up every time and it kind of feels like we should at least kind of address them. But we're going to do that in the Patreon-only podcast. So again, if you want to be offended by our views on that, then you have to pay us £3 for the honour. We've had one on Twitter, which was Jane Robertson, who says, her Hands in the Ruck is spitting on the field. She says, disgusting and unhygienic at the best of times on the field of play, and it's dangerous now in terms of COVID-19. Ian, your take on spitting?
True. Yeah, I've always wondered why players do that. Is it like an acid build-up thing or what?
I have the answer. I'm pleased you asked, Ian.
Excellent.
See, this almost looks like we planned this, which we haven't at all. I Googled this for Jane. When Jane threw this up, and I was interested in it as well. So this is according to BBC Science Focus magazine. She said, several studies have shown that exercise increases the amount of protein secreted into the saliva, especially a kind of mucus called MUC5B. The mucus makes the saliva thicker, which makes it harder to swallow, so we spit it out. It isn't clear why we produce more MUC5B when exercising, but it may be we breathe through our mouth more, so the mucus stops the mouth from drying out. Some sports, such as basketball and tennis, penalise players for spitting, but football and rugby don't, so the players are free to expectorate, which I like that word. The word expectorate. I think the answer to this is spittoons.
Private spittoons, or like somebody like Waterboy brings on a bucket for you to spit.
I think a Waterboy brings on a spittoon at breaks, and also they're just at the side of the pitch. And you can go and casually walk off we ding into a spittoon. Someone takes them away, disposes them as medical waste.
And they did say they can do concussion tests through spit as well, can't they? So if everyone gets their own little spit bucket, they can go, oh wait, he's concussed, he was lying, get him off.
That's true. Yeah, you could do coronavirus tests as well.
Aye.
You could test the spit after the game, just wipe a wee dab in there, and then if it came back, even if it was like people's spit mixed together, somebody had it.
Oh, did you see the Scotland-England under-19 game get called off halfway through because Billy Stark, the Scotland football coach, his test results came back mid-game and he was positive. Although I mean, Scotland were losing 3-1 at the time, so possibly there's something going. Yeah.
Do you think that was deliberate? There's a tactic for Gregor Townsend. He needs to like false. See, when we're down for Wales, someone in the backroom staff just needs to get a positive coronavirus test through.
Yeah. It's like rather than the clear urine samples for drug tests, it's like we need some. It's like the reverse of that. We need some dirty spit. But I suppose, like when I was a kid watching football, the camera always seemed to cut to players just when they were spitting. So obviously, when you're a kid, that's a sort of learned behaviour.
I think it's because
where Jane's coming from.
Someone had asked this on when I was looking for the answer to Jane's question. Someone had asked this and said that that it is more prevalent in football because you see it more. But I wonder whether it's just that they cut to players who are standing. When there's nothing happening, you cut to a player, and when you stand and do nothing, that's when you're more likely to just have a wee gub on the floor. Ron Wilson says, socially distanced spittoons, there's a phrase we never thought we'd hear ourselves say.
Not with that attitude, Ron.
We've had another entry into Hands in the Ruck. This is Cabwy Callum on Twitch. This is our first Twitch. Well done, Cabwy Callum. You're the first person to comment on Twitch who is not a Russian spam bot, so well done for that. I'll give you a badge if I had one. He says the SRU not using the outlines of the 3 mountains on their support Scottish Rugby campaign. Use the names, but I think that'd be a great idea. Of actually the outlines of Ben Nevis and was it Nevis? And I can't remember what the other two were. One was the bottom one's Lomond.
Right. I've been up Goatfell. That's the highest point I've been in Scotland.
It wasn't Goatfell.
No, I don't think that. I think that's only 830 something feet. So it doesn't go.
Yeah, it's barely a mountain.
Nah, it's not.
More of a large hill.
Well, it was still steep, and I got sunburn on my calves. All right, so it's tough.
What's had its hands in your ruck apart from sunburnt calves?
This is actually quite a literal hands in the ruck here from the Bledisloe Cup. I don't know if any of you saw it. It was a fascinating game. Some people say it was the greatest game of all time, but I think that's just hyperbolic.
That's pushing it.
Yeah,
13-all is not. If it's 13-all, was it 16-all?
16-all.
It's not 16-all. Is not the greatest game of rugby ever played.
No. I could think of like 5 from last year alone. But yeah, right at the end, Rhys Hodge had a chance to win the match with a long-range penalty. It scudded off the post. And now, if I'm Dave Rennie, I would be absolutely livid right now. And Dave can get a bit feisty. But there is absolutely blatant hands in the ruck from Tupou, literally like 10 metres in front of the sticks. He's like lying all over the floor, goes to scoop the ball out of the ruck. The only thing that maybe stops it is that Corabetti, he manages, as the ball's kind of spinning up in the air, he manages to grab hold of it. But it is the most blatant penalty you ever see. And the referee's on the wrong side of it, so you can't blame him. He's on the other side of the ruck and there's bodies everywhere. TMO, I'm not sure if TMOs are allowed to get involved in these things, but it's a blatant pen. And it would have given Australia a chance to beat the All Blacks in New Zealand for the first time in, was it 16 years? Something like longer than that. And then even later on, while this madness is still going on, it went on for another 8 minutes. New Zealand had a chance to score in the 88th minute. But I think Corabetti, again, it was, I think Hooper effects a turnover. He gets on the ball. As he's trying to exit the 22, there are at least two there's a high tackle, and then Richie Mo'unga goes in. He looks like he's going in high, strips the ball back, and New Zealand have a chance to win the match. Now, thankfully they didn't, but if they did, I imagine we would hear Dave Rennie screaming from here. It was just the most dodgy bit of refereeing I've seen for quite some time.
Yeah.
And it's a shame that we have to keep talking about poor refereeing. I mean, as well, there's a try in the lead up to the first New Zealand try. Rico Ioane's foot is on the touchline. Ione then did one of the most hilarious failures at grounding the ball you've ever seen. But no, it was just a really, really poor decision, and it was a literal hands in the ruck, so I thought you'd appreciate that.
The one hands in the ruck I did enjoy, there was Ari Salvea, who managed to get a turnover whilst limping.
He's a hard man.
He is a hard man. I mean, it's interesting the Dave Rennie thing. I know it could just be a new coach bounce, but he may, given what we've heard from Glasgow Warriors, it may be that he's more suited to coaching international rugby, where he has very little to do with the players in downtime. He has to deal with the squad that he selects at that time.
Well, who was it? There's somebody, a former player, right? Was it maybe James Horwell? He said, Dave Rennie's known for building good team cultures. But as, Jason O'Halloran said about, Scottish player psyches, maybe Dave Rennie is just got, like Australia and New Zealand, similar necks of the woods. Maybe they've got more in common personality-wise, and maybe he'll be better at dealing with them. But a pretty impressive first result from him in windy Wellington.
I think it was Rory was pointing out. I mean, that's a win grown in Scotland. You got Dave Rennie, Matt Taylor, big Scott Johnson upstairs. So we'll,
we're a feeder nation now.
We await the thank you card from Australia. Any Australian listeners, at least sign up to the podcast, the Patreon for a month. I think we deserve nothing less. Oh, to be fair, you took Scott Johnson off our hands, so we can't be too picky. My hands in the
too much of a go at me. Actually, no. He did some decent things, but he was also a bit of a.
He also turned up to a Sevens tournament mid-tournament and told the Sevens lads that they were all being made redundant. So it's not to be too complimentary about him.
Oh, I saw him at a Sevens tournament once. Maybe that was the one. He didn't seem to want to mingle with the crowd much. So
I can imagine he wouldn't know. My hands in the ruck. It comes back to a subject we've touched on before. Is World Rugby have reached a decision to ban trans women players from playing at the elite level, so that's professional level of the sport. And they have said that domestic unions have their own discretion to make up their own rules, but they would emphasise that they believe there's a risk to trans women playing with other women, playing with cis women. It's a very disappointing decision that they've come to that conclusion. I was kind of hoping they wouldn't. They kept saying they were just consulting on it, and it was just that they'd invited these people in who'd obviously been kind of bending their ear with a particular agenda, had allowed them in to present to them, and I kind of thought, well, they'll kick it in the long grass, but no, they've made the decision to put in a ban. They're I think the first sport to do that in the world. So it's groundbreaking is the wrong word, but they've done it. They're the only Olympic sport to have done it. It's this is an already marginalized group being excluded from the sport, and there's no indication at all that this is a live issue at the elite level of rugby. There's not. I don't think there has been a single trans woman player who's played at elite level. I don't think there's any players who are knocking on the door looking to play at elite level. Most of this is grassroots players just looking for a club to play at. The science is. I think the science that's been put forward is obviously peer reviewed, but I don't think it's been done in the context of rugby. It's been done in the context of other sports, which aren't necessarily comparable. And the reason World Rugby have given is that a trans woman who's gone through male puberty has advantages over a cis woman who hasn't, even if they take medication to lower their levels of testosterone. Now, the ban doesn't extend to trans women who have not gone through male puberty. So that's people who've transitioned before male puberty. It doesn't apply to them, but it does apply to trans women who've gone through male puberty, because World Rugby have decided that they have an advantage. I think that ignores the uniqueness of rugby that you at all levels of sport, women's rugby, men's rugby, pro level, international level, grassroots level, you have mismatches all over the place. When you look at Darcy Graham versus Jack O'Donoghue at the weekend, Darcy Graham's 5'9" and 13 stone in his stocking feet. Jack Donaghue's 6'3" and 17 stone, and Darcy Graham gets in low and lifted him off the rock. Nemi Nadalo, versus anybody. John Oluma versus Mike Catt, running over the top.
Ali Price took Nadolo down.
There you go. Exactly. There is a risk. The risk of larger players and people and stronger players and bigger players playing against smaller players is a risk in any game of rugby at any level. And there is no evidence at all that we're about to have an army of trans women about to march and take over women's rugby. And that appears to be where the fear is coming from. This is about people who want to go and play rugby, and they're being stopped from doing it. And I think they're still allowed to play touch rugby, but I think that misses the point. I also think that there's a message there, an unfortunate message that World Rugby's sending out about women's bodies, that they can't be tall, big, and strong, that they're somehow shrinking flowers that need to be protected. And it's disappointing. Rugby, a sport that prides itself on being a sport for all, but it's not, and that's not just disappointing. It's a bit kind of
inclusivity. I know it's a highly nuanced. We've spoken about this before, and it is a very nuanced and complicated issue. And I'm not a scientist, but when we spoke about it before, we were like, well, like you said, there are size mismatches everywhere. And then we got a nice letter, an electronic letter from a trans woman, and her point which she put across, and I thought was a damn good one, is if you are that worried about a certain individual being so much bigger and what have you, why don't you do it by a case basis? Why a blanket ban seems it's completely non-inclusive. It's the opposite of it. It's just saying, no, you're too big and strong. And like you said, we're not expecting, someone who's a 6'8" lock who can't quite make it just to go, all right, that's it. 2 years of hormone therapy and a snip here and there. I'll go play women's rugby. I don't think, if that's, I don't think that's going to happen.
No,
it is quite upsetting. I'm sure J.K. Rowling's delighted, but no, I don't like the call.
It just feels over. I think the other thing as well, which kind of which makes me slightly suspect about the reasons for the decision. I don't think it's at World Rugby. I think that the scientists that went in, they presented their evidence, and it's peer-reviewed evidence, and it relates to other sports, and it relates to biology rather than applying the biology to rugby and rugby's specific circumstances. But so that that's not. I don't think there's necessarily an argument as such that there aren't some advantages in certain individuals, and this is why the blanket ban's seems a bit overkill. But the fact that there is no protection for trans men, so that is women that have transitioned to become to the male gender, that there's no protection for them. They're able to carry on. So if World Rugby is so worried about the risk to players, it's not happy to put women in what it says is a dangerous position because of the perceived risk from a small number of trans women who may be larger and may be bigger and may have advantages, compared to putting trans men at risk for going and playing up against men who and it's the same. So if you're going to ban one, then why not, for risk reasons, why not ban the other?
Yeah, true. Because if you're not concerned about the size differential, then but you're happy for a smaller person to potentially go and the smaller person, if it's like sort of they're saying you can take your own risk there, but they're not allowing the players of those who, if you're playing against a transgender woman, should it maybe be the club's choice? Have they put it out to players themselves? Have they asked any players' unions about this? Or did they just go, we'll ask this scientist, look, here's our information, both, there we go, decision made. obviously it's very
there was a whole. I mean, there was a whole range of presentations made at this big conference that they had about it. But I think there was no. I think what was missing at that conference and what they've been criticised for is that there were no. The voice of trans women wasn't heard at that conference. There was no, and there are plenty of, scientists out there who are trans women who would put forward their own evidence to counter it. They were in the room, and but they weren't invited to speak. So they're in the room and they contribute to the debate, but they weren't invited to put forward their own presentations, putting their own view forward. So I think that's why it's disappointing, because although they might have been part of the discussion, they weren't able to kind of put forward their own arguments and their own evidence to kind of counter some of the points being made. So that's where it is. I think the worrying thing is that World Rugby have kind of put it back on home unions to make their own decision. I hope, given Scottish Rugby are supporting the Thebans to put in a bid, I think, for the LBGT
the
World Cup. Yeah. So I would hope that Scottish Rugby sticks with its current policy and doesn't just kind of throw its hands up and say, we don't know what to do, it's too hard, we'll go World Rugby because of the risk. And given we've got Dr. James Robson and we've got world really leading kind of doctors and stuff, you would hope that an informed decision will be made about grassroots rugby in Scotland. But I think the worry is that a lot of unions will just say, well, World Rugby says it's too much of a risk. That's it.
Yeah, and also I'm worried about this. Like, this could, this could end up going to the Court of Arbitration for Sport and all stuff and dragging rugby's name through the mud.
Yeah.
And we don't want that. I was actually just trying to look up there if you can get if there's any combat athletes, like boxers or MMA fighters or anything, that if there's a sort of ruling there, but that's going to take a bit more research, I think.
Yeah.
Aye.
It's not. There's not. I mean, it's the first sport to do it. It's without precedent. I think rugby, in the same way as apartheid, it's going longer term. It's going to be found to have been on the wrong side of history.
I think I read something briefly about cycling, but they've not exclusively banned it. I think it's
probably case by case basis, which is probably what it should have been. It's hard, and like we said, it's not. I don't think there's a long queue of people banging on the door saying, I want to come, I want to play elite rugby, and I'm, 6'5" locks saying I've been unsuccessful in men's rugby, so I'm going to transition to be a woman to be successful. That's not happening. No. Anyway, there we go. That's the hands in the ruck for this week. We'll no doubt circle back to this when Scottish Rugby makes its own decision. So all eyes on them now to see what happens. That's it for us for this week. We'll be back next week. If you're a Patreon, we're gonna have a wee kind of 20-minute chat about eligibility rules, me and Ian, in a bit. But for the moment, it's goodbye from me and goodbye from Ian.
Bye.